Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with ATG. I appreciate you tuning in today to learn about best practices for commercial dynamic grading. This is a workflow I've worked on a lot over my 20-year career in civil design. It's obviously evolved through the different iterations and capabilities of the software. Just like everything else in Civil 3D, there's obviously 100 ways of doing the same thing. I just happened to come across this workflow, and this so happens to be the most efficient way I have found so far. And that's definitely not to say that this is the only way to do dynamic commercial grading. If there's any questions about the webinar, you can reach out to me on my email. If you would like to chat, you can send a private chat, or if you could, go ahead and submit your questions through the Q&A section on your Zoom panel. That way they could be recorded and definitely answered towards the end of the webinar. So first, I guess the main question is, what is dynamic commercial grading? Like I said previously, there's many ways of doing commercial grading. This has worked for me, this particular workflow, since Civil 3D 2019. At that point, we were able to utilize feature lines in corridors for baselines. And that was really a turning point for this type of workflow. So what dynamic grading is to me is the process of utilizing assemblies to do our grading of our top of curb and back of curb, sidewalks, and even our ADA landings that would normally be done with a different workflow, such as grading features or additional feature lines, and then having to add those to a surface. With this workflow, I think it makes grading less tedious and way more efficient. And by dynamic, I'm not saying it's going to be 100% dynamic. Like everything else in Civil 3D, it's going to be around 80 to 90% dynamic. There is still going to be some things when you make changes, you are going to have to update. Hopefully those gaps in the workflow will definitely be fixed in future releases, and this workflow can then be that much more efficient. So how do we make use of assemblies when we're doing commercial grading? Typically, as a designer, we want to design to the flow line of a curve, but we also want a TC that is relative to the flow line. And we also want to build our back a curb, and in some cases, a sidewalk. With an assembly, I can use a curb subassembly to create this dynamic relationship. I prefer this over the grading tools for the fact that grading tools typically can result in file corruption. If you don't delete a grading object correctly, or with the feature line workflow, if your feature lines become too heavy or too many, you can also end up with a corrupt file. Is dynamic grading for everyone? This way of doing grading is definitely not for everyone. We're going to utilize an auxiliary surface, and then we're going to create corridor. That is really an advanced type of workflow that definitely beginner and intermediate designers or CAD techs might find difficult. So ultimately, this is an advanced technique geared towards advanced users. And the way I came up with this is, can this help with earthwork? And that was my ultimate goal. So when I was doing the traditional design work, ultimately we want to have a balanced site or as close to balance as possible. And if you use a feature line workflow, you'd end up with a way more feature lines than you anticipated. You'd have to drop your feature lines or copy your feature lines to another site and drop them to get earthwork. And in a lot of cases, again, you are in essence playing with fire, waiting for the potential crash to happen in your drawing when you end up with too many feature lines. And same can be said with using grading tools. So with this workflow, we will see that I can create multiple surfaces and having the earthwork update almost instantaneously. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our demo. All right, so here I have a basic layout. This is an actual site. It's actually our CTC headquarters in Minnesota. And you'll see this is I have a surface in here that we're going to pull elevations from with our feature lines. We have the proposed site plan in here and an existing file that we want to tie these curbs into. So the first part of this workflow is we want to create blocks of areas that we will be grading. So the first part, what we're going to want to do is create polylines. And as we're drawing our polylines, we're going to want to put vertices wherever we're going to want those vertices to be on our feature line. And the reason I do it with a polyline is it's way easier to add the vertices, in my opinion, when you're creating the feature lines up front through a polyline than it is to actually come in here and try to create a feature line natively. So with those sections created, we're going to do one long feature line across the front, wrapping all the way around to this existing tie-in. And then we'll do another feature line coming across, tying into this existing tie-in. What I'll be able to show you also is there's an island here. And this island will automatically be able to be generated based on the auxiliary surface we're going to use. And when I say auxiliary surface, it's going to be a surface that's the underlying ultimate design, but it's going to be, we're going to end up pulling polylines and feature lines off of our face of curve or a flow line. And we're going to have that feature line be dynamic to our auxiliary surface. And that's another feature that has really made this workflow very efficient with the latest updates in Civil 3D, where you can have feature lines be dynamically linked to another surface. And with that all done, what we will then do is come in and create our corridor that will wrap around all of our face of curb at our flow line, and it'll establish our top of curb, back of curb, sidewalks in some cases. It'll create our islands. And not only that, once it's done, we can also create a second surface of our datum and go ahead and pull earthwork. So let's go ahead and get started on the initial phase. So let's just go ahead and create a polyline. Start here. And we're just going to go all the way around where we think that we're going to want some vertices. And so we could come all the way across here. Usually when we have these long sweeping curves, I will just go along those curves. But typically in construction, what will happen is a lot of the contractors, because there's a different section for drivable for trucks and drivable for cars, they will cut this straight through. So in essence, I'm actually designing this the way it's probably going to get built. And that could be an advantage for us in the long run. Have that polyline in. This one will be a simple one. It's not much on this side. Let's go ahead and go to here. So let me go ahead and create another polyline out here that we can actually tie to or extend these lines to. I'll just grab this one. Go out there. So now we have this main feature line, which is going to be our polyline for now. But this is going to be our flow line ultimately when we create the feature lines. So now what we want to do is break out the parking areas. And we'll just go to all of our endpoints. And here down here, we'll do the same. And so like I was saying initially, we blocked off the grading to be able to happen in our parking area. That's going to be separate from our main drives. So in a typical situation, you might want this to come up at 2% and push all the drainage towards your parking area, which would then, in this case, if we look at the natural contours, it really wants to come down to this corner naturally. So with our polylines created, let's go ahead and create our feature lines. I'm just going to go up to the feature line command, go ahead and create them from an object. We'll select our polylines. Popped up off screen. What I like to do is also utilize our sites. This is going to be really important down the road. So we'll go ahead and call this site aux for auxiliary. And let's also name our feature lines the same. We'll go ahead and use a basic feature line style. What I like to do just to make sure that all these polylines that or feature lines we're going to create are at the same elevation, I'm just going to assign them all as 0 elevation. That way I could really keep track of how what parts I've graded, what parts I haven't graded. So I'm going to go ahead and accept those. And now we have our feature lines. So now what we want to do is go ahead and go to our surface. Let's create a new surface. And let's call this auxiliary. And we really don't want this one to show up. What we're ultimately going to do is just use this as a basis for our corridor. So the only surface we want to ultimately create is like an overall grading surface, maybe a finished ground surface that all these pieces will be pasted into. We'll end up piecing in the finished floor, which will be on a separate site, and we'll paste in our corridor surface once we get there. So with that surface created, auxiliary, let's go ahead and grab all of our feature lines. Let's go ahead and add them to that surface. So now with that surface created, we can actually come in here. Let's go ahead and start putting some design in here. So obviously we want to match existing ground there. Let's go ahead and have a feature line, pull that elevation. We know that this is naturally wanting to drain down to this low. So let's come down at, let's say 5%. And on this side, let's go ahead and pull that surface elevation. also come down at 5%. And let's just continue down at 5%. And on this side, what we want to do is we need to match our existing ground surface. So we'll go ahead and pull that elevation. And now let's finish coming along the front of the building. So we know that the water is going to come here and it's ultimately going to come down to this corner based on the existing ground contours. So we can go ahead and keep this flat, maybe come down at another 5%, maybe continue down at 5% in front of the building. And now we could probably keep this flat since it's going to be way higher than anything on this side. Keep that at 0. And now we probably want to start coming up at 5% on this side. And we'll just go ahead and have this grade calculate for us. So I'll go ahead and use the, um, the set grade between 2 points. Starting elevation is already calced. Last elevation saying 0. So I obviously haven't added existing ground there. And that's why I like to have those zeros in there. When something like that pops out at you, you can definitely see if something is messed up. 11% steep, but workable. So now what we have is we also need to grade in this parking area. So we probably want to drain away from the building at 2%. So let's go up at 2% there, up at 2% there. Same along here. And let's go ahead and have this auxiliary rebuild on its own auxiliary surface. So on its surface, it looks like there's not a whole lot going on here. And so now with the auxiliary surface created, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy my line work over from my site plan that I want to use for my face of curb. So we have this will be our face of curb along the front of this building. And let's go ahead and pull, we have this one that'll come along this side. So with this, we now want to build a corridor, but we're not really ready to. We need to go ahead and turn this polyline into a feature line. And this is where the dynamic work starts to happen. So we already have our auxiliary surface created. So when I come up to create a feature line from an object this time, when I select that polyline, I'm going to go ahead and put it on site 1 so that they don't mess with each other. I'm going to go ahead and leave the name feature. Let's go ahead and give it a different style. Flow line. And we do want to assign elevations. And let's go ahead and erase the existing entity. But now I want to pull my elevation instead of assigning one. Let's go ahead and pull it from a surface or auxiliary surface. We do not want to add intermediate grade points, but we do want this feature line to be relative to our surface. That way, as we make changes to our auxiliary surface, these feature lines will update as well. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK on that. Now, if we grab this feature line, start looking at some of these grades, it's following our design, right? So 5% across there, down at 2%, up at 2%. So it's done its job on that side. So now let's create the feature line for the opposite side. Create from an object, site 1, all of these settings are fine. From the auxiliary surface, This is fine. So now with this created, now we have the first piece to create our corridor, right? We have a baseline. Now what we have to do is create our assemblies that are going to work with our baseline. And the first thing we want to look at is if we grab the feature line, we want to see which direction this feature line is going in. Now I drew the polyline going this way for our main feature line for the auxiliary surface, but we just end copied this one in. I don't know which direction it's going in. A quick check is if you select the feature line and go to your elevation editor, it's going to bring up the panorama. What we can do is just go to the very top, select our 0, and you can see the little triangle right there. That's telling us that's 0, which is what would mean is our curb on our assembly would have to be on the left side to be outside of our flow line. And so that's fine now that we know that. And for our other feature line, let's go ahead and check that. So we would want our 0 to be up here, which it is. And so the reason we want to look at this before we start creating our assemblies is to see which side our sub-assemblies need to be on. So let's go ahead and create an assembly. And let's just call this one curb only. Go ahead and leave all those settings the same. Let's go ahead and bring this in, and now let's go to our tool space. What we're going to want to do is just create a curb. We're going to want to go to our properties. We want to be on the left side. I don't know about you guys, but I've never been a fan of what these are. I don't know why they weren't named more specific, but if you hover over any of the dimensions, it'll give you a description of what the dimension is going to fix. So depth of the gutter of the flange point, we'll leave that the same. The width, so we don't have a gutter on this one, so we just needed to make this 0.01 since we can't make it a 0. We can go ahead and leave that one alone. The height of the curb from the gutter flow line to the top of curb. So this is our height of our curb. At 6 inches, it's fine. Let's go ahead and make this a 6-inch wide curb. I know in some places it can be up to 9. And the width of the top of curb is only 4. So that way whenever we build any kind of models in Civil 3D, we all know that you never want anything vertical because it'll just wig out on you. And the last dimension is our height of back of curb, and we can go ahead and leave that the way it is. So let's add in our curb there. Now let's go to our curbs. Let's go ahead and add in our sidewalk, which we're going to want on the left side as well. Actually, before we do that, got ahead of myself. Let's just go ahead and copy this assembly over to here. And we'll copy curb over. Now we'll add a sidewalk. And let's just leave it 5 feet on the left side at 2%. And let's go ahead and copy this guy over. And we're going to need a 4th one. And so what we're going to need this 4th one for is, so we're going to have a curb and have a curb with the sidewalk. And what we're going to have is a curb, but we're going to want to create a landing for our ADA ramp. So what I've found to be the easiest is to go ahead and make this a 0 height curb. So I'll go here to my dimension D, make this, since we can't make it a 0, and then you just got to adjust backside to 7 inches. There will need to be a sidewalk. And then this last one, what I want to do is I know that I'm going to want along this boundary is I'm going to want to grade down to existing ground. So let's go ahead and add a link slope to surface. Make sure it's on the left. And just because I've ran through this, let's go ahead and make it super steep. So now for a little bit of housekeeping, let's go ahead and call this one curb with sidewalk. Rename this one to curb landing. And actually with this one, we don't need a sidewalk. Let's go ahead and get rid of that sidewalk. And just to make sure that this is still connected, let's go ahead and move it there. And this one we'll name curb to existing ground. So these are our 4 assemblies that we're going to come and create our corridor off of. So now that we have the second piece of our corridor, we can go ahead and start creating it. Let's go ahead and come up to our home tab and corridor. Let's create one. And we'll call this one, corridor 1, like it wants to. That's fine. And this is where the feature lines come in. This is, when they added this in, I just saw a limitless amount of corridors you can create. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select the green box on the right of it. And it's gonna automatically bring in what side it's on and the feature name. Let's just go ahead and do curb only across the whole thing. Go ahead and hit OK. What I like to do on these smaller commercial sites is I'm gonna change my frequency down to 5 and 1, respectively. I'm gonna go ahead and hit apply. Go ahead and rebuild our corridor. And now that we have our corridor built, we want to surface off of this corridor, but we don't really want to show the surface for this corridor. We want to paste it into an overall corridor. So let's go ahead and select our corridor, right click, and we'll go to our corridor surfaces. Let's create a new one. We want to change the style to no display because we don't want to see it. We'll just do our top. Let's go ahead and add that to our surface, hit apply, rebuild our corridor, and hit OK. So now what we want to do is create a new surface. And this is where we're going to paste our surfaces into. So let's just call this one finished ground. And we do want to see this one because we want to start to see how our grading is working. So we'll go ahead and give it a style. Hit OK. And now let's go ahead and open up our FG, go to our definition, go to edits, and let's paste corridor surface in. And so there it is. And you can see what our corridor is doing is my contours are following the face of curb coming up. I guess to illustrate it a little bit better, let me go ahead and switch my view. And go ahead and flip this guy to where we could see it. And to really make it pop, let's go ahead and have a conceptual, and just to make it where we're only seeing what we want to see, let's go ahead and make the existing ground a no display. And so now you can see, here's my curb. It's following all the way around, and it's following the feature line that we set. And just like that, I have a feature line that is my flow line. If I come over here to the plan view, this one. And so here's where the dynamic piece comes in. Let me go ahead and zoom out here a little bit. And just to show how this works, I'm just going to steepen this side way up. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this feature line. And let's go ahead and make it 10%, and make this guy 2% again. So that's also gonna change our feature line. Oops, sorry about that. Actually, I grabbed the wrong one. What we want to grab are our auxiliary feature lines. And that's the whole reason we created that auxiliary surface, is so that these feature lines can be dynamic to that one. So let's go ahead and change the site that we're on to our auxiliary site. And let's change this one, minus 10%, minus 2%. And now this is at minus 10. And so now our corridor wants to be rebuilt. Let's go ahead and rebuild it. And now it's down there. And let's also go ahead and set this surface to automatically rebuild. If I zoom in over here, you can see, obviously we have a train wreck there because we didn't follow this line through. But I was able to make changes and now my curve is updated. So let's go back into our feature line and let's put it back to where it was. We go to our corridor and I'm gonna go ahead and set this guy to rebuild automatically. What I've done is I've actually went ahead and I should have updated. Let's go ahead and rebuild the surface. And so, sorry about that. So let me go ahead and pan out on this side. And so now what we would want to do hypothetically is, let's say along this section, we want to have a sidewalk. And so where this corridor is really dynamic is I can go ahead and grab it. Let's go ahead and split the region. So let me grab this station where we have another region and split this region to where right about here. One of the things I like doing with corridors is I don't like going into the properties that much, and I'll actually use the tab up here quite frequently. So now we could just go to region properties. Let's go select that region. And let's go ahead and make this not just a curb only, but let's make it a curb with a sidewalk. So go ahead and hit OK. And you see that the surface updated. And now we have curve with the sidewalk. And so let's say along here, we also have a curve with the sidewalk. We can do the same thing. Let's split this region. Maybe there. And let's go all the way down to the end to here. And let's go ahead and swap this piece out as well. And so upon regenerating, there's our sidewalk graded out for us. And again, coming back to the landing one that we created. Now there might be a better way of doing this. I just haven't found it yet. Let's say we want to have a ramp, maybe an ADA ramp through here. What I have found is best to do is, since we have a corridor that's building out for us, is you actually have to just create a gap to let it triangulate to. And here, I'll show you how that works. So let's go ahead and split this region. And let's go ahead and go from maybe here. Let's go ahead and split it again to this point. And let's say this is our landing. And this is going to be the other wing of the ramp. So we've broken it out, but like I was saying, I want it to just triangulate across. I haven't found a better way to make the ramp triangulate across. So what we're going to come in and do is just delete the wing part. And now let's go ahead and change this region to our ADA landing and let it go ahead and rebuild. And let me go ahead and swing this view around. Go ahead and zoom in. You can see there's our wing on this side, our wing on that side. And there's our ADA landing. And so the last piece is we need to build a corridor along this side or add to our corridor. So it's really simple. We'll just go ahead and select our corridor, come up here to add the baseline, which will be a feature line again. Hit our green selection box, select that feature line on our other side. And now let's go ahead and add regions to it. Go ahead and select it from the start. And we're going to come all the way through this guy to the end. Let's go ahead and do curb only. So let me know that there was no targets found. And let's go ahead and change frequency to 1. And so just like before, like I was saying, so we never came on this side, set our elevation. So we set this one, but we never set this one. So let's have this grade be 2% draining away, and this one 2% draining that way. And we don't have any grades out here yet, so that's fine. So now if I zoom out on my surface, you can see on this side now, let's move to the other side. I now have my curb built out on this side. And we also have that other assembly that we created where we want to grade down to existing ground. So just like we did before, we'll go ahead and select the corridor, split the region, split this one, let's say to here. And now let's go ahead and switch out our assembly to our grade to existing ground. And let's go ahead and assign the target. So we'll go edit target. Target mapping pops up. Let's go ahead and target our existing ground. Hit OK. And when it rebuilds, when I zoom out, it's graded down to existing. So with this workflow, it's very easy. For instance, what I set up is this: is we're at 2 to 1. Obviously, it's still not hitting existing ground, so we can actually just grab our subassembly part, and if we want to do, let's say, 1 to 1, go ahead and change our subassembly and rebuild our corridor. And now it's done our new grading for us. And like I had mentioned before, so let's go ahead and quickly do this island. So we're going to do the same workflow. Let's do a feature line from an object. And we're going to want it on site 1. flow line. I'm going to assign it from the surface, the auxiliary surface. Just like before, let's go ahead and see where this is starting at. Looks like it's right under my cursor there. And the next spot is that way. So our curb would be on the left. So it's going the right direction. Let's go ahead and go, let me zoom in on this side so we can see the island pop up. Got my corridor. Go ahead and add a baseline, which will be a feature line. My selection box to select the feature line. And for this instance, I will go into the properties because when I add the region, this is going to circle back on itself. And so it's going to be really hard to do it on the screen. And in this case, it is better to just come into the properties and do it here. What we're also going to want to do is change our frequencies to 5 and 1. And now when I hit apply, you're going to see my island just pop up out here. And so since this feature line is relative to my surface, any changes I was to make to this design would update my island automatically. And so now let's get into creating the additional surface for our quantities. So let's go ahead and turn this surface off. What we're going to see over here real quickly, if I zoom in. So here's our flow line up here, but we have all this. That's going to be our cut factor to get down to our datum. So all I want to do is tell the surface, hey, create me, or tell the corridor, create me another surface that's this datum piece, with the build out on the backside. So I'm going to go ahead and select our corridor again. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to corridor surfaces. Let's go ahead and create a new surface. Let's call this one datum. And we can go ahead and put this one on our display. When we hit the drop down here, we just select the datum. And we're going to go ahead and add that to our datum surface. Go ahead and apply it and hit OK. And now you can see we are showing a surface that is going out to the backside, up and over, back up. And so that's what we would want to show for our quantities when we run the quantities. So in this case, if we actually go to our Analyze tab, with our volume, I can run the volume, fill. Let's not have this guy display, and our base surface is going to be our existing ground. Comparison surface will be our datum. So just like that, I could see that I'm maybe too far in the cut. So I could start raising the site. And as I raise the site, I can simply come to my volume, which will have all these read out, and just refresh it as I'm making changes to the surface. And just like that, I'm getting my quantities. And it's obviously off because my surface isn't tying to the existing ground there. So we can go ahead and see that. So you can see just by utilizing these techniques, I mean, I can do quite a bit. I can also come in here, as an additional workflow, go ahead and have my finished floor as another feature line and have a corridor assembly, maybe that gives me my 4 to 6 inch exposed slab. Add that to my surface and grade to it. So with that, I've really tried a lot of different workflows when doing the commercial grading. So far, this has been a really good workflow for me. And I hope it's as beneficial to you guys as it has been for me.